right. Well, if you have your Bibles with you, you'll be in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, and we're going to begin in verse number 19. 1 Corinthians 9:19. While you're looking that up, when I was in college, the Bible college that I went to was a ministry of a local church. And so we all had to attend that local church, and they had a rule for all the college students, and that was that we had to park in the parking lot that was the farthest away from the auditorium. And I can remember as a young, dumb college student, I thought it was pretty stupid that I had to park so far away because I was actually paying to be there, right? Like I was paying, at the time, I think $1,000 a month, which I thought was incredibly expensive for a college education plus room and board. And looking back now, I thought I had it really good back then, right? But I was paying $1,000 a month, and you're going to make me park all the way out there? And I was so frustrated by that, you know? But as I've gotten a little older, as I've matured a little bit more and had a chance to be in ministry, I've began to understand why they wanted the college students to park the farthest away. Do you understand why they want the college students to park the farthest away? Because they are the ones that had the most energy, right? There are other people in the church that needed the closer spots and those sorts of things. People oftentimes today, even if we're not college students, we want to park in the closest parking spots, right? But what we forget sometimes is that there are senior citizens, right? We forget that there are people in wheelchairs. We forget that there are people that are expecting. You know, we forget that we do have guests and that kind of thing. And so a lot of times when people take the closest parking spots, I genuinely think a lot of times it's done out of complete ignorance. They just don't know any better. Sorry, now you do. Sorry to ruin that for you, all right? But they do it out of complete ignorance. But there are other people that get the close parking spots, and they do it not out of ignorance. They do it because it is all about them. Their attitude is this: if you wanted a better parking spot, you should have been here earlier. You guys can laugh at that, all right? That was funny, okay? I know who was sitting there parking in the close parking spots now, right? No, when you see someone that parks, 2 counties over, when there's plenty of parking spaces a lot closer, it just goes to show that they understand what the title of our sermon series has been over these last few weeks, and that is this: they understand that it's not about me. There are other people that could use the closer spots. There are other people that could benefit from this. We are often faced with these kinds of decisions. We have often opportunities where we can park farther away on almost a daily basis. Things we don't have to do, but when we do them, it's a blessing to others. I'm not going to ask you to point fingers. As a matter of fact, I'm going to ask you intentionally not to elbow the person next to you. But some of the people in this room are really, really good at trash Jenga. Do you know what I'm talking about when I say trash Jenga? It's when the trash is overflowing and it's ready to go out, but you don't want to take it out, and so you start stacking it up so it doesn't fall over like Jenga, right? How many guys are good at trash Jenga, right? How many guys are married to someone who thinks they're good at trash Jenga, and you know what they're up to, right? We have opportunities like this on almost a daily basis, things we don't have to do, but when we choose to do them, it's a blessing to others. I am probably one of the world's worst about trash Jenga. If it's not trash Jenga, it's trash compactor, right? Push it in as far as I can. But last Sunday, just on a whim, I don't know why, I must have been feeling a little froggy. And so the trash was, actually I do remember why. It's because I had cooked chicken on the Blackstone the day before and I had trimmed all the fat off. And if you leave fat chicken in the garbage, what happens with it? It stinks, right? So when I opened the garbage, both of them were full, and I knew one of them had chicken fat in it, so I actually took the trash out. And my wife sent me a nice little text message that said, "Oh, thank you for taking the trash out." And she even put the little emoji hand thing after it, I didn't have to take the trash out that morning, right? I was on my way to work. I was ready to do my thing, and I decided in that moment I was going to take it out. It may have been a bit selfish. I didn't want the house to smell like that. But in doing that, it was a blessing to my wife. The reason that we're talking about these things is because that is the theme of the verses that we're going to look at today. As a matter of fact, if you were to give this passage a title, I would simply call it this: Doing What You Don't Have to Do. When you look at the last half of chapter 9, verses 19 through 27, we're going to see that it's all about doing what you don't have to do. We looked already at chapter 8 and the first part of chapter 9. And if you remember, those verses were all about what Paul would not do for the sake of others, right? He said, if eating meat is going to cause someone to stumble, then I won't eat meat. He said, I have a right to be compensated as a minister of the gospel in the first part of chapter 9. He said, but if that's going to cause someone to not come to the gospel, he said, then I'm not going to demand a salary. So the first half of it has been, hey, it's not about me. There are some certain things that I just won't do. But when you get to the end of chapter 9, he says, but there are certain things that I will do. And as a matter of fact, it's things that I don't necessarily have to do, but I want to do them for the benefit of others. So let's look at what he did. In verse number 19, it says this. For there must be... Oh, I'm in the wrong chapter. All right, I'm still in 1 Corinthians 11 from the Lord's Supper. Verse number 19, it says, for though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more. Now, when you see that word servant there, it's literally the word slave. And what he's saying, he says, even though I'm a free man, I have made myself a slave unto all men. Now, in our day, slavery is not common, but in their day, it was very common. And Paul says in this verse, even though I'm a free man, I have made a voluntary decision to enslave myself to others. He did not owe this to anyone, but he voluntarily made this choice. As a matter of fact, when he uses this word servant, they have multiple words for this word servant in their language, and this was the strongest of those words. So when the Corinthians would have read this, it would have been like shocking, because here's the Apostle Paul. I mean, this is the guy that he had a right to a lot of things, and he didn't have to make himself a servant to anyone, but he chose to. It's kind of why that show that I'm not even sure if it's on the air anymore, Undercover Boss. You guys remember Undercover Boss? It was a huge hit. And it was a huge hit because these CEOs, these CFOs, these business owners of multi-million and multi-billion-dollar corporations would voluntarily submit themselves to the people that they did not have to submit to. They could have been telling those people what to do, but they put themselves underneath them and did things they didn't have to do. How many of you guys love seeing a multi-millionaire, billionaire guy cleaning a toilet, right? It's shocking. Like, he doesn't have to do that, but he made a voluntary choice to do it. Now, in the show, they did it for their employees, right? There was a little bit of an underlying motive there. But in this passage, Paul is not just doing it for his employees. He's not even just doing it for his local church members or even believers only. The Bible says that he has chosen to do this unto how many men? All men. He had chosen to enslave himself to all men. Just think about this. How would this world be different if Christians had that mindset? If we had this mindset of, instead of, I got what's coming to me, we say, I am going to enslave myself to you. I am going to serve you when I don't have to serve you. I'm going to take the trash out when I don't have to take the trash out, even though it's someone else's chore, right? I'm going to park farther away, even though I don't have to do that. And you should have been here earlier, right? But we face these kinds of opportunities on a daily basis. And one of our core values at Grace, and I believe one of the core values of Scripture, is that people matter. People are a priority. And Paul lived this out by making a conscious decision to serve all men. We have opportunities to do that by when you're at work and there's one cup of coffee left, leaving that last cup of coffee for someone else. Or here's an idea, drinking that last cup of coffee and then brewing another pot, even though you're not going to drink it, right? We have an opportunity to serve all men when we choose to put our carts back in the cart corrals. You know, I complain about Menards a lot because they do a lot of dumb stuff, but they got really good prices, so I keep going back. But one of the things I don't understand about Menards is why their cart corrals are in the Staples parking lot. Are they not forever away from everything? It's oftentimes, does anybody else notice this before? Pat, you know what I'm talking about. It's faster to just take the cart back into the store than to put it in the cart corral because it's so far away. But this is one of those ways that we can choose to serve all men, is to go put the cart away. Now, there's not a law. Do you have to do it? No. As a matter of fact, there are people that get paid to do it, and they're usually underneath those cart corrals scrolling social media, not putting the carts away, right? You've seen them. Yeah, that's an opportunity for us to serve all men. Just think about this, though. I mean, we joke around about it, about carts and trash and everything else, but how could this transform a home if every person in that home said, I'm going to serve you? How could that transform a church? How could that transform a community if this world was filled with people that chose this lifestyle of being a servant even though we don't have to? As you continue in verse number 20, it says, "And unto the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might gain the Jews. To them that are under the law, as under the law, that I might gain them that are under the law." Now, in that day, there was tension amongst different religions. I know we don't have much of that today. There was a lot of tension, especially in Corinth. They say that Corinth was kind of like Los Angeles, New York, and Las Vegas all together, right? It was just this place where it was a melting pot of people. And so there was a lot of religious tension there. And the Jewish people that were there, which would have been a lot of them, and Paul was also a Jew, they would have seen themselves as being under the law. There were all these different laws that they had to follow. We talked briefly about that a few weeks ago. One of the things that even today, Jewish people that are under the law, they believe that you're not allowed to light a fire on Sabbath. And so on Saturdays, they have Shabbat elevators. I can't remember if I talked about this in the first service or not a couple of weeks ago, but the Shabbat elevators actually stop at every floor because if a Jewish person were to touch the button, it completes a circuit, thereby creating a fire, and thereby they have broken the Sabbath. So if you go to New York City or if you go to Jerusalem and these places with a lot of Jewish people in the community, they have Shabbat elevators that just stop it. Could you imagine being on the 80th floor and it's like Elf was in there pushing all the buttons, right? You could stop at every floor. But that's how they felt. The people in that day, they felt like they were under the law. And Paul fully understood this because he was Jewish. He had grown up around this, but he had believed the gospel. He had believed that Jesus Christ fulfilled the law, and he was no longer under the law, but he was under grace. Paul was perfectly free to eat pork chops, right? He was perfectly free to wear polyester. Now, that might be a little bit of a curveball, but did you know that one of the laws was that you were not allowed to mix different kinds of material into your clothing? And so, could you imagine how excited he was to wear a polyester tux once he got saved, right? With the big old collars and everything. No, he knew that he wasn't under the law anymore. And so when he became as a Jew in verse number 20, he was voluntarily submitting himself to a law that he was no longer under. Could he push the button on the elevator? Yes. Could he eat the pork chop? Yes. Did he have to follow these other things? No, he did not. This would be very similar to what we talked about over the last couple of weeks as far as liberties and rights, as far as like Christians that disagree on controversial topics like alcohol or tattoos or smoking or music or the way you're supposed to dress and all that. When Paul faced that kind of tension, he chose to respect other people's opinions. He chose to respect their preferences. And when those preferences or when their positions were not going to cause him to sin, or if they did not violate his conscience, he participated in them. He would do the things that he was not expected to do. Can I just give you a pro tip in regards to the ministry that we should have as believers? You don't have to say everything you think. Some of you, that's like, what? Like, you don't have to tell the world on social media everything that you think about every subject, right? Here's Paul, who used to be a Jew. He's been saved. He's no longer under the law. But when he gets around these Jewish people that are still under the law, he could have very easily said, don't you guys understand? You don't have to do this anymore. He could have blasted them and said, if y'all want to do that, go ahead. I'm not doing it because I don't have to do that anymore. But that's not what he did. He didn't say everything he thought. He said, I am going to, as long as it doesn't violate my conscience and as long as I am not sinning, I'm just going to go along with it for now. And we'll understand in just a moment why he did these things. But I want you to see the last one in verse 21 where it says, to them that are without law as without law, being not without law to God, but under the law to Christ, that I might gain them that are without the law. Those that were without the law is referring to people that were not Jewish. It would be people that they called Gentiles. He essentially did not demand that these Gentiles adhere to Jewish culture. He did not demand that they adapt to church culture, if you will. Because here's one of the things that we have to understand is that people that are without the law, people that don't have a religious frame of reference. They don't have any kind of religious background. They're agnostic or atheist, or maybe they're just out there and they just don't have an opinion. Unsaved people, and I hate to spoil this for you, but I think it's important that you know this. Unsaved people are going to act like unsaved people, right? A dog's going to bark. A cat's going to meow. And an unsaved person is going to act like an unsaved person. And when Paul was around an unsaved person and their language was not the kind of language that he would use, when their politics were not the kind of politics that he would have, when their worldview was not the worldview that he had, he chose to be patient with them. He didn't demand of them, oh no, let me tell you the way you're supposed to be voting, or oh no, let me tell you the way you're supposed to be talking. Oh, I'm a Christian. Don't talk about that, or don't say that kind of stuff around me. He didn't participate like that. He chose to be patient with them. They didn't know what he knew. More importantly, they didn't know who he knew. This does not mean that we need to join them in something that's clearly wrong. Paul is like, to those that smoked weed, I smoke weed. That's not at all what he's saying here, okay? What he's saying is that he understood that they had a greater need than keeping the law. Jesus himself rubbed shoulders with publicans and sinners. And when we are around people that don't have that frame of reference, they don't know Jesus Christ as their Savior, it would be wise for us just to be real with them, just to be authentic with them, and to remember what their main need is. Their main need is not for them to see us as some kind of hero, like we're better than everyone else. We are not the hero. We need a hero, right? And Jesus is that hero, and we're to point them to him. I said that was the last one, but there's actually one more in verse 22 where it says this: to the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. This is what he was talking about in chapter 8. There were the people that had a weak conscience. They were believers, but they would not eat the meat that had been dedicated to idols, because if they did, they felt like that was somehow betraying Jesus, and it would cause them to stumble and potentially go back into idol worship. So this is what he's talking about here. He's talking about those that could fall because of some of the choices that we made. Ultimately, in all three of these situations, this is what Paul did. And we have a slide for this. Paul did this. He led with his connections and not with his convictions. Do you see that? When he was around a Jewish person, whenever he was around a non-Jewish person, when he was around a believer that was kind of weak in their faith, he didn't lead with his convictions and say, let me tell you what you need to believe. Let me tell you where you're wrong and I'm right. No, he didn't lead with his convictions. He led with his connections. Because as we've all heard, and I hope your parents taught you this at some point, if not, I'm about to teach you now, right? People don't care what you know until they know that you guys never heard this before? Until they know that you care. People don't care what you know until they know that you care. He was willing to do things that he didn't have to do. Possibly even things that he didn't want to do. But he was willing to get out of his comfort zone. But here's the big question. We see what he did in those early verses, but it leads us to a simple question. Why would he do that? Why would Paul choose to act this way around Jewish people and act this way around non-Jewish, Gentile people, and act this way around weaker Christians? So it leads us to the second obvious question is, why did he do it? You see the answer to that at the end of verse number 22. He says, to the weak became I as weak, that I might gain the weak. I am made all things to all men. Why? That I might by all means save some. So you answer the question. Why was Paul willing to do what he didn't have to do, according to these verses? Yeah. To reach people with the gospel, to save people, so that people could be introduced to Jesus. He did what he didn't have to do out of a desire to get others to know Jesus. He did what he didn't have to do, and he didn't do some of the things he wanted to do back in chapter 8 because he wanted people to know Jesus. I want you to think about your interactions with other people, because all of us have had interactions with other people over the last month, right? Think about the interactions that you've had with people over the last month. People in general, just you ran into them in the store, or you drove alongside of them on the road. What about the people that you know a little bit more? People that are super religious, but they don't know Jesus. What about the people that are not religious at all and they don't know Jesus? What about the people that you know that know Jesus, but they're kind of weak spiritually and they're easily offended? You guys have some people coming to mind, right? Let me just ask you, how did you interact with them? Would you say that your interactions with them were consistent with the way that Paul interacted with people in those similar situations? Paul took time here for us to examine his motivations. He took time for us to point out, or he took time to point out for us, here's why I did what I did. You see, oftentimes we live in a culture where some people are just people pleasers, right? How many of you guys would consider yourself just kind of a natural people pleaser and you kind of have to fight that a little bit? All right, I'm a little bit of that. The people pleasers are like, yeah, I'll raise my hand because you want me to be happy that you raised your hand, right? Some of us are just natural people pleasers, and so we interact with people in kind ways because we just want them to like us. Some of us just want to be accepted socially. We just want to have friends, or we want people not to think we're weird. Sometimes we interact in kind ways because we want to avoid conflict, or we want to maintain some kind of reputation. Sometimes we do it just because we want to gain favor with that person. But Paul understood that how we live influences the gospel's impact in the lives of others. It's important for us to examine our own motivations and our interactions with others because this passage is teaching us that we should be interacting with others with a desire to help them get to know Jesus. When I was between my freshman and sophomore year in college, it would have been the summer of 1998, going back to the 1900s, all right? But back in 1998, I traveled with a group called Neighborhood Bible Time, and our training was in Boulder, Colorado, which I'm not sure if you know Boulder, Colorado very well or not, but it's not exactly known as being a mecca of Christian conservatism, all right? It's kind of known as being a liberal area, and there was a place called the Pearl Street Mall, if I remember right, and the Pearl Street Mall was kind of where all the weirdos went, and everybody, before it was cool, right? They would get out there and do all their stuff, and so they're trying to teach these young 19 and 20-year-old kids how to get out of their shell and be bold, and so they took us to the Pearl Street Mall and told us that we had to do some street preaching. You guys ever been street preaching before? Oh man, it's something. And I didn't know what I'm 19 years old. You know, I'm dumb as a brick and I'm out there and I'm like, y'all need Jesus, you know, and I'm like scared of some of the people that I'm seeing, you know, and it was weird. But it got me thinking about some of the people, like when we see, for some of you, when you hear street preaching, what comes into your mind? Something really positive or really negative? For a lot of us, it's negative. Because what you see with a lot of these street preachers is they got the big old signs that say repent or die, you know, and those kinds of things. And when you think about the way that they yell at people and they've got their microphones. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some people out there that are Christ-like in the way that they do it. And I'm not talking about those people, but they tend to be the exception and not the rule. And what we see here is that there are some people that get out there and they're like, if you don't like what I have to say, then turn or burn, baby, you know, and like, don't listen if you don't like it. Is that the attitude that Paul had in this passage? Look at the life of Jesus. Was that the attitude that Jesus had as he walked on this earth? A much better way of doing this, I don't know, maybe like go where they are and like be nice to them. Talk to them. Show empathy toward them. Find out more about their lives. Listen to them. I know a guy, and I didn't ask for permission to share his name, so I can't tell you his name. A lot of you know who he is, but he is passionate about reaching people. And so he found out that a local school had an opportunity for someone to be on the wrestling team at a non-Christian school. And so they need a wrestling coach. And he's like, I'll help. And so he signed up to be a wrestling coach. And you would think that he had years and years of high school experience, maybe wrestled in college a little bit, or maybe at least watched a YouTube video on how to coach wrestling. You know how much he knew about wrestling? About as much as I know about wrestling. Never wrestled a day in his life. But he went to this secular college joined the wrestling team as a coach because the head coach is a Christian, and he knew that many of the people that were on the team needed to hear the gospel, and so they brought him in as a character coach. And all it did was gave him opportunity to just rub shoulders with these guys and get to know these guys. And as he's gotten to know them, guess what he's gotten to do? Share the gospel with these men and teach them the ways of Jesus and share with them the gospel of Jesus Christ. I love that in this passage, and we kind of blew past it, and some of you that are reading the Bible, you're like, Josh, you're totally missing it. And you're right, I did it on purpose. But look at verse number 19, where he says, for though I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all. He tells us why at the end of the verse. That I might gain the more. The reason I did that with the Jews is because I wanted to reach the Jews. In verse number 20, he says, under the Jews I became as a Jew, verse 21, to them are without the law is without the law, but under the law, that I might gain them that are without the law. He says, the reason I did this was because I wanted to reach them with the gospel. Paul changed his methods based upon who he was around, but he never changed his message. His methods were different, but his message stayed the same. It wasn't, when we start thinking about reaching people with the gospel, it's not so much about what you say as much as it is about what you do. Oftentimes, I can remember when I was taught how to lead someone to Christ, it was very formulaic. You need to teach them, we're all sinners, sinners deserve punishment, but Jesus paid that punishment for us, and you've got to believe the gospel by faith as your only hope. You've got to put your faith in Jesus Christ. Is that true? Absolutely. But if I go to someone that I have absolutely no relationship with and say, you need to believe that you're a sinner, and you go through all four of those, a lot of times they're like, dude. Now, sometimes it does work. I've had a chance to meet. And introduce a lot of people to Jesus in that way. But I've found that the much more effective way is to do what Paul was doing here, and that is to go where people are, rub shoulders with them, listen to them, love on them, care for them, show empathy toward them, because ultimately Paul knew, and we should know, that eternity and the souls of men are at stake. The end result of our investment in others should be that they know Jesus. Which leads us to the last question, and that's in verses 24 through 27. So how did he do this? How he did it is seen in verse 24. Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize. So run that you may obtain. Now, Paul is essentially practicing what he preached here. He's like, you need to become all things to all men. And for us, we may gloss over this, but this is in Corinth. Now, back in those days, they had the Olympic Games, right? You guys familiar with the Olympic Games, right? It was something that happened, I think, every 4 years. But there was another set of games known as the Isthmian Games. And the Isthmian Games were played every 2 years. Anybody want to guess where they happened to play those games every 2 years? The city of... not Atlanta, Corinth, all right? It was in Corinth. He's writing to these Corinthians. And so right after he tells them, become all things to all men, he uses an analogy with which they would have been incredibly familiar, these Isthmian Games. And with these Isthmian Games, these athletes would enter into a long, dedicated 10-month protocol to where they were going through this grueling schedule to prepare for these games. And he tells them in verse number 24, he's like, hey, you know how those guys that are competing in those events, he says, they run that they would obtain. And in verse 25, he says, and every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. He says, these guys go all in to win a crown that's made out of leaves that's going to fade away someday. And with this athletic imagery in mind, he says to them, we need to be doing what they're doing. Just like they did this, we need to do it. Just like they run to win, we need to run to win. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that only one person is going to win spiritually. It means that we need to run with focus. It means we need to run with intensity, to prioritize the goal. And this is an incredible way of completing this section of verses that we've been studying over the last several weeks, because throughout chapter 8 and throughout all of chapter 9, he's essentially saying that we need to keep our eyes on the focus. It's not about you. It's not about me. It is about reaching people with the gospel. Just like they had a goal, we need to prioritize our goal. And in order to do that, we have to be temperate. That's what he said in verse 25. Temperate just simply means self-controlled. This would have referred to their training regimen, their dietary regulations, their sleep habits, their physical conditioning. In other words, they were willing to say no to certain things in hopes of gaining something greater. Follow me? You say no to the Snickers and the ice cream so that when you get on the scale, you'll look a little bit different than last time, right? Like we say no to one thing in order for the greater yes. And this is what it looks like to be committed to the gospel. We run to win. We prioritize the goal, which is the gospel, and we seek to be temperate. I don't have to do these things, but I do them for the sake of others. I say no for a greater yes. I really feel like, as believers, and including myself, I think we have eternity amnesia. We forget that there's much more than this life that we're in. I don't know if you saw the study, but I think it came out recently, and the study said that 10 out of 10 people die. Yeah, it took a lot of time for them to compile all the data for that study. Look, we're all running after something. And much of what we're running after is perishable. In that verse, he says, they run for a corruptible crown, but we run for an incorruptible. One person said this, our greatest fear should not be that we don't succeed, but rather that we'll succeed at something that just doesn't matter. Chapters 8 and 9 are all, hey, it's not about you, but so much of what we're running after in life is about us. And this seeks to get us to recalibrate, to refocus on Jesus and leading others to Him, and not to waste our lives that are just going to be on corruptible things. In verse 26, he says, I therefore so run, not as uncertainly, so fight I, not as one that beateth the air. He ran and fought with certainty. I can remember the first fist fight I was ever in. How many of you guys have ever been in a fist fight before, right? I remember the first fist fight I was in. It was on the elementary playground down in Walnut Grove, Tennessee, and a kid said something to my girlfriend, because every cool fourth grader has a girlfriend, right? And he said something mean to my girlfriend, and so I was like, you're going down. And all I remember is we ended up on the ground, and I was punching him in the stomach. And I was punching just like they did on the cartoons, right? Just doing this, and then I heard the whistle blow, and that meant that the bus was ready. So I jumped up, he jumped up, and we went and got on the bus, and that was it, right? But I was focused in that moment, right? I was fighting not as one that beat the air, I was beating his stomach, all right? I was focused in. I knew who my enemy was. And I love that Paul points out who our enemy is. I don't know who you think your enemy is. Maybe you think it's your boss, or you think it's culture, or maybe you think it's the devil that you're fighting. But in verse 27, he points out who he's fighting against. He says, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. Paul was fighting his own flesh. Just like when we go through these chapters and we see that it's not about me, right? We have to understand that life is not about me, and we do need to bring our bodies into subjection, because our greatest enemy is the person in the mirror. He brought his flesh into subjection for the good of others. He recognized the sobering reality that he could spend his life telling others about Jesus and then be destroyed by his own flesh, or disqualified by his own flesh, according to the end of verse 27. Uncontrolled habits, undisciplined appetites can lead us to being useless. I think we all know spiritual leaders that have fallen. And when we think about spiritual leaders that are fallen, and they're continuing in that fallen state, a lot of people aren't really looking for advice from them, right? And that's what Paul said. He says, I recognize that it could happen to me. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we could fail as well. We'll talk more about that when we get into chapter 10. But don't lose sight of the fact that his desire was to stay true. And it was rooted in his desire to help others know Jesus. I'll conclude today just by telling you that we've had a few storms lately. I'm sure you guys saw the storms that have happened. And I was here at the church in the afternoon on Thursday, I think it was. It was Wednesday. And I got a text from my daughter Emma and her husband Ford, and this was a picture of what had happened at their house. They had that big old branch that fell right there in their yard, or in their driveway, and they couldn't get out. And so they said, what should we do? And there was some water coming through their ceiling, and I was like, it'll be fine, just pray. No, I said, you need to call Paul Lentz over at Cook Construction. He'll hook you up. And so I actually forwarded that picture to Paul, and I said, hey, you might be getting some business. And he said, hey, what's their address? I'll go over there and help them. And I said, here it is. And he goes, no charge. I just want to help them. So, okay. So I ended up finishing what I had to do, and I made my way over there, and Paul was just getting off of the roof, and there was a small puncture hole in the roof, and he had cut up a piece of metal and battened it down, and he had brought a big old chainsaw with him, a fuel-injected chainsaw. I mean, it was a big one. I had my little dinky one. It felt like it was like a little Tykes thing, compared to that. I was like, let's put that in the truck. But he brought it so he could make sure he could get up on the roof. And he said, yeah, I got it all taken care of. I said, man, thanks for doing that. I said, I'm going to start cutting this down. He goes, let me stay and help you. I said, no, you don't have to do that, man. You got a storm, and there's all kinds of other roofs I'm sure you can get to. And he's like, yeah, I want to stay and help. And he's wearing like jeans and a polo, no hat. I came with the frog togs on. I mean, I had the hood and the rain jacket and the pants. I'd stopped and got my rubber boots, my muck boots. I was ready to go. And Paul's out there just drenched. I thought it was water, but it turned out I'm pretty sure it was sweat, because he ended up staying and cleaning out that whole thing with us. And I was like, man, you really didn't have to do that. And he said, no, I wanted to do that. It was a blessing. But you know what is interesting is that he kind of lived out what we're talking about here. Like, he did something that he didn't have to do. And he did it for the benefit of someone else. He met them where they were. He said, what's the address? I'll be there. And then he put his body in subjection, right? It was something that his body was like, I could be in the car right now going home and getting into some fresh clothes, but he put his body in subjection. When we look at this passage, it's not about just helping others out. It's specifically about helping others get to know Jesus. And so I want to give you a couple quick takeaways. I want to encourage you to identify one person that needs Jesus in your life. Who's one person that needs the Lord and you know it? What's one specific way that you could go to them and fix their roof? Of course, I'm not talking about getting on top of a roof, but what's something that you don't have to do, but you could do? We can't say, I know this person that's lost, and I've been praying that God will just get a hold of their hearts. Well, you can't pray and ask God to do what He has equipped and empowered you to do. Maybe there's a habit or an appetite or an attitude that is making you less effective for the mission of sharing the gospel. Maybe you've just said, nope, I don't have to do that. I'm not going to do that, and I don't care if you like it or not. Maybe there's some kind of attitude that is hindering your effectiveness in sharing the gospel. Or maybe there's a spiritual discipline that's missing in your life. Whatever it may be, I want to encourage you to ask the Lord to help you to make some steps forward, not only for the sake of pursuing Jesus, but also for the sake of helping others to do the same. Let's pray together.